The summer of 1971 in Los Angeles carried a particular kind of weight, a heavy, stagnant heat that seemed to seep into the very brickwork of the city. Nowhere was this more palpable than inside the Main Street gym, a cavernous space where the air was a thick mixture of stale tobacco, dried sweat, and the pungent aroma of liniment oil. It was a place where the sunlight filtered through high, grime-streaked windows in long, dusty shafts, illuminating the slow-motion dance of dust motes and the rhythmic, violent labor of the athletes within. This wasn't a place for the casual or the weak, it was a sanctuary for those who understood the brutal, honest language of the human body in conflict. In the center of this world was Elena Vance. At 26, she was in the absolute prime of her physical existence. She was not a female boxer, in the eyes of the regulars, she was simply a fighter, one who had earned her place through thousands of rounds and hundreds of bruised knuckles. Standing 5'9", she possessed a physique built for efficiency, long, lean muscles that rippled under a light sheen of perspiration as she worked the heavy bag. Her movements were a testament to years of disciplined boxing, her feet stayed low to the canvas, her weight shifting with mathematical precision from the ball of one foot to the other, her hips rotating to drive the force of her entire body into every blow. The sound she produced was a steady, rhythmic thud, a heavy, wet sound that told everyone in the gym exactly how much power she was generating. Her trainer, an older man named Miller whose face was a map of scar tissue and broken capillaries, watched her from the corner of his eye while chewing on the end of an unlit cigar. He didn't need to give her instructions anymore, they had reached a point of silent understanding. Elena was looking for a challenge that the current roster of sparring partners couldn't provide. She was faster than the heavyweights and stronger than the lightweights. She was looking for something she couldn't find, a wall she couldn't break through. It was during a brief lull in the gym's cacophony, a moment when the speed bags stopped rattling and the timers hadn't yet buzzed, that the door at the far end of the hall creaked open. A man walked in who didn't fit the established landscape of the room. He wasn't carrying a gear bag, and he wasn't dressed in the traditional attire of a pugilist. He wore a simple, dark short-sleeved shirt and trousers that looked flexible enough for movement but were far from the standard athletic wear of the time. He didn't head for the locker rooms or the front desk. Instead, he walked toward a quiet corner of the gym, away from the main rings and the heavy bags. He was compact, perhaps 135 pounds, with a frame that seemed almost delicate compared to the massive, knotted muscles of the heavyweight boxers nearby. However, those who looked closer, those who lived by the observation of movement, noticed something unsettling about the way he walked. There was no wasted energy. His steps were silent, his posture perfectly centered, his eyes moving with a calm, predatory intelligence that missed nothing. Elena stopped her work on the bag, her chest heaving slightly as she caught her breath. She watched as the man began a series of strange, fluid movements. He wasn't shadowboxing in the way she understood it. He didn't tuck his chin or hold his hands in a high guard. Instead, his arms moved in circular, flowing patterns, his fingers flickering like the tongue of a snake. His feet glided across the concrete floor with a lightness that seemed to defy the heavy atmosphere of the gym. To Elena, it looked like a performance. To a woman who had spent her life learning how to take and give a punch, his movements seemed ornamental, perhaps even arrogant. She felt a surge of the familiar, competitive heat that had driven her to 3 regional titles. She wiped the sweat from her eyes with her glove and looked over at Miller, who was also watching the stranger with a furrowed brow. "Miller," Elena said, her voice raspy from the workout. "What do you call that? Is he practicing for a play?" Miller shrugged, his eyes never leaving the man. "Owner said a friend of his was coming by. Some martial arts guy from the films or something. Just let him be, Elena. You've got 2 more sets on the bag." But Elena was already moving. The boredom of her routine, combined with the man's seemingly effortless grace, had sparked a need to test the reality of his art. She walked toward the corner, the sound of her heavy boxing boots echoing against the floor. As she approached, the man stopped moving. He didn't startle, he simply transitioned from motion to absolute stillness in a single heartbeat. "You look like you're having a lot of fun over here," Elena said, stopping a few feet away. But this is a boxing gym. We usually prefer to hit things rather than the air. You looking to actually get some work in, or are you just here for the mirrors? The man turned his head slowly. His face was remarkably calm, his expression devoid of the typical bravado found in such a place. He looked at her not with aggression, but with a quiet, analytical curiosity. The air does not hit back, he said, his voice steady and controlled. But sometimes, it is the hardest thing to catch. Elena let out a short, sharp laugh. Yeah, I've heard the philosophy before. Usually right before someone gets their bell rung. I'm Elena. I'm the one who usually does the ringing in this gym. I can see that, the man replied. You have a very strong foundation. Your weight is well distributed. I don't need a critique, Elena snapped, her pride stinging. I'm looking for a partner. 3 rounds. I want to see if that flowing stuff works when someone is actually trying to put a glove on your chin. What do you say? Or are you worried you'll lose your flow? The man looked around the gym, noticing the crowd that was beginning to gather. The regulars had sensed the confrontation, and the air in the room grew thick with anticipation. He looked back at Elena, assessing her height, her reach, and the tension in her jaw. Boxing is a fine sport, he said softly. It is very efficient within its own rules. But I do not think you want to do this. There is no reason for us to hurt one another. Hurt me? Elena's eyes widened. Honey, I spar with guys twice your size. You won't hurt me. And I'll be careful with you. We'll keep it light. No headgear, just a touch and go. Unless you're scared. The man remained silent for a long moment, then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. If it will help you understand, then we will go. But we stay in the circle. No gloves for me. My hands are my own. They moved to the main ring, the heart of the gym. The crowd had grown into a solid wall of bodies, young fighters, grizzled trainers, and even the guys who just came to bet on the weekend matches. They leaned against the ropes, their faces illuminated by the harsh overhead lights. Elena climbed through the ropes with a practiced ease, her movements sharp and aggressive. She slapped her gloves together, a sound that cracked through the silence like a whip. The man stepped over the ropes with a different kind of grace. He didn't bounce on his toes or shake out his arms. He simply walked to his corner and stood there. He took no stance that Elena recognized. His hands were low, almost at his waist, his fingers relaxed. His lead foot was pointed directly at her, his weight slightly back. Seconds out. Miller called, stepping into the role of referee. He looked at the man, then at Elena. Keep it clean. Break when I tell you. Watch the low blows. Let's go. The bell rang, a sharp, metallic clang that signaled the start of something none of them were prepared for. Elena moved first. She did exactly what she had been trained to do. She came out behind a stiff, probing jab, testing the man's reaction. She expected him to slip, to duck, or to parry. Instead, he did nothing. He just leaned his head back by a fraction of an inch, the glove whistling past his nose so closely that it might have brushed his skin. Elena frowned and doubled the jab, followed by a straight right hand. It was a classic combination, delivered with world-class speed. Again, the man wasn't there. He didn't move far, he moved just enough. He shifted his hips, and the punches sailed over his shoulders. To the crowd, it looked like Elena was missing on purpose, but those in the ring knew better. She was throwing with intent, and she was hitting nothing but the humid air. Stop dancing. Elena growled. She stepped in deep, trying to cut off the ring. She pinned him toward the corner and let loose a barrage of hooks to the body. These were the punches that had won her titles, short, compact, and devastating. The man's hands finally moved. It wasn't a boxing block. His arms flickered out like lashes, his palms meeting her wrists and forearms. He didn't absorb the force, he redirected it. Every time Elena swung, her own momentum was used to pull her slightly off balance. It was like trying to punch a ghost made of silk. She felt his hands, cold, firm, and incredibly fast, tapping her arms away before her punches could reach their peak power. The gym was incredibly quiet now. The only sounds were the scuffing of boots on the canvas and Elena's increasingly ragged breathing. Elena swung a massive left hook, a home run punch. The man didn't retreat. He stepped forward, into the arc of the punch. He moved into the space where Elena was most vulnerable. For a second, they were incredibly close. Elena felt the heat radiating from him, the absolute stillness of his core. He placed a palm on her chest, not a punch, but a firm, controlled shove. The force was unexpected. It wasn't a push from the arms, it felt like the entire floor had shifted beneath her. Elena stumbled back, her heels catching on the canvas, and she nearly hit the ropes. She stood there, her face flushed, her lungs burning. She looked at the man. He hadn't changed his expression. He hadn't even broken a sweat. "You're fast," Elena said, her voice a mix of frustration and newfound respect. "But you're not hitting. You're just playing defense. Let's see what happens when I stop being nice." Elena changed her strategy. She stopped chasing and began to wait. She narrowed her eyes, focusing on the center of the man's chest, watching for the telltale sign of a breath or a muscle twitch. She began to use her footwork to create a trap, circling slowly, drawing him in. She fired a lightning-fast jab, not to land, but to distract. As the man tilted his head, she launched her right cross, but she didn't aim for his head. She aimed for where she thought he would move. For the first time, the man didn't just evade. He intercepted. As Elena's right hand moved forward, his lead hand shot out like a bolt of electricity. It was a stop hit. His fingers, held straight and rigid, tapped the inside of her bicep. The strike was minor, but it caused her arm to numb for a split second, killing the power of the punch. In the same motion, his other hand rose, his palm passing inches from her jaw. Elena swung a desperate uppercut. The man's leg snapped up. It wasn't a high kick like you'd see in a movie, it was a low, functional side kick. His heel stopped exactly 1 inch from her lead knee. He didn't follow through, if he had, the joint would have shattered. He held it there for a fraction of a second, a demonstration of absolute muscular control, then retracted it before Elena could even react to the threat. Elena was losing her composure. She felt the gap between her skill and his, and it was a chasm. She threw a flurry of punches, left, right, abandoning technique for sheer volume. The man became a blur of dark fabric and tan skin. He moved inside her guard, his hands moving with a speed that the human eye struggled to track. Tap. His palm touched her forehead. Flick. His elbow redirected her hook. Snap. His hand hovered over her solar plexus. He was showing her. Every move she made was an opening. Every punch she threw was an invitation for him to end the fight. He was mapping her entire body, pointing out every weakness without ever actually causing her pain. Finally, Elena gathered every ounce of strength she had left. She stepped in, leveled her shoulders, and threw a straight punch with everything she had. It was a perfect punch, the kind that finishes a fight. The man didn't move away. He exploded forward. It was a movement of such raw, concentrated power that the air in the ring seemed to crack. He lunged, his entire body coiling and uncoiling like a massive steel spring. His right fist came forward, moving in a straight, short line, the shortest path possible. The fist grew larger in Elena's vision. She didn't have time to blink. She didn't have time to move. She felt the wind pushed aside by the force of the strike. The fist stopped. It didn't make contact with her skin. It came to a dead halt exactly half an inch from the center of her chest, right over her heart. But the energy didn't stop. The snap of his movement, the sudden deceleration of his mass, created a physical shockwave. Elena felt a dull thud in her chest, a vibration that rattled her ribs and stole the air from her lungs. It wasn't a hit, but it felt like the weight of a mountain had been placed against her for a millisecond. Her legs buckled. Not because of a physical injury, but because her nervous system had simply shut down in the face of such overwhelming speed and intent. She sank to her knees, her hands catching her weight on the canvas. She sat there, staring at the floor, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The gym was so quiet you could hear the distant sound of a car horn 3 blocks away. No one moved. No one spoke. The atmosphere was heavy with the realization that they had just witnessed something that transcended the sport of boxing. The man slowly lowered his hand. He stepped back and took a deep, silent breath. The intensity vanished from his eyes, replaced by the same calm, polite mask he had worn when he walked in. "Strength is not just in the muscle," he said softly, looking down at Elena. "It is in the timing. It is in the ability to be nothing, so that you can become everything, when the moment requires it." He reached out a hand. His fingers were long and calloused, but his grip was surprisingly gentle. Elena took it and allowed him to pull her to her feet. Her legs felt shaky, and she had to lean against the ropes for a moment to steady herself. Who are you?" she asked, her voice a low whisper. Before he could respond, the gym door opened again. A group of men in sharp suits and a man with a camera around his neck walked in. They looked hurried and out of place in the grimy gym. "Bruce," the man with the camera called out. The studio called. "They moved the test up to 4 o'clock. We have to go now if we're going to beat the traffic to Burbank." The man in the ring looked at the newcomers, then back at Elena. He gave a small, respectful bow, a gesture that felt ancient and completely out of place in a Los Angeles boxing ring. "My name is Lee," he said. "Bruce Lee." He turned and hopped over the ropes, landing silently on the concrete. He grabbed his small towel, draped it over his shoulder, and walked toward the exit with the same silent, purposeful stride he had arrived with. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea, men stepping back to give him a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and awe. Elena stayed in the ring long after Bruce Lee had left. She watched the door close behind him, the sound of the latch clicking back into place. Miller walked over to her, his cigar long forgotten, his hands resting on the ropes. "You okay, Vance?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Elena nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Did you see his hands, Miller? I've never seen anything like that. It was like fighting a shadow that could turn into a brick wall whenever it wanted to." Miller looked at the door, then back at his fighter. "I've been in this gym since the 50s. I've seen some of the fastest lightweights in the world. But that wasn't speed. That was something else. That was like he knew what you were going to do before you even thought of it." For the rest of the day, the gym was quiet. The usual bravado, the shouting, the loud music, it was all muted. The regulars worked their bags and skipped their ropes, but their eyes kept drifting back to the main ring. Elena didn't return to her heavy bag. She went to the locker room, sat on the wooden bench, and unwrapped her hands. She looked at her knuckles, then at the center of her chest where she could still feel the phantom vibration of that final, non-existent blow. She realized then that her boxing, as successful as it had been, was a language of more power, more weight, more aggression. The man named Lee had shown her a language of less waste, less tension, less ego. In the years that followed, as Bruce Lee's name became synonymous with the dragon, and he transformed the world's understanding of martial arts, Elena Vance would often tell the story of that afternoon. But she didn't tell it as a story of a loss, because there were no judges and no scorecards. She told it as the story of the day she finally found the wall she couldn't break through, and discovered that the wall was actually a mirror. She learned that the most dangerous person is not the one who can hit the hardest, but the one who has mastered the self so completely that the fight is over before the first punch is even thrown. she never fought quite the same way again. She became more fluid, more patient, and far more dangerous. She stopped trying to be a boxer and started trying to be, as the man had said, like water. And that, perhaps, was the real victory that afternoon, not a knockout, but a transformation that lasted a lifetime.